And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the post-World Series edition of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. This is your host, Ben Jacks, and I'm coming to you from our new location on the border of Wicker Park and Humboldt Park in Chicago, Illinois. It is Wednesday night, early Thursday morning of November 2nd into November 3rd, and here we are. The World Series has come to an end. A great 7-game series, as I predicted. I got that right. However, I got the winner of the World Series incorrect. And that's quite all right with me because it was a spectacular World Series. And the more deserving team won. I'd like to just go ahead and say it right now. Congratulations to the Chicago Cubs, their organization, my friends who are fans of the Cubs, and all other Chicago Cubs fans around the world. That was a spectacular 7-game series, ending with the climactic Game 7 that took place tonight. And we'll get into that in a bit here, but I'd like to go ahead and say, that this was, for me, one of the 3 or 4 greatest games I've ever seen in my life. I still have a pretty long memory, so I'm not going to slight Game 7 in 97 down in Miami with the Marlins and Indians, nor will I turn my attention away from the 0-1 Yankees-Diamondbacks classic out in the desert. But this was as good as it gets. Very unique ball game. We're going to get into kind of the details of what happened in tonight's game, but certainly a surreal, unbelievable situation going on in the city of Chicago right now. Hearing a lot of fireworks and car horns going off in my neighborhood as we speak. So, to start things off, let's go ahead and get going by talking about tonight's Game 7. Heading into tonight's game, obviously the first 6 games, the Indians had won. They won Game 1 behind the great pitching from Corey Kluber. And then Game 2, the Cubs bounced back, jumping all over Trevor Bauer and getting an excellent start from Jake Arrieta to tie the series up at 1. Then the series shifted back to Wrigley for Games 3, 4, and 5. The first games at the friendly confines since 1945 in the World Series. Cubs got off to a slow start at home with the Indians shutting them out in Game 3 last Friday behind Josh Tomlin and the consummate relief corps in Brian Shaw, Cody Allen, and Trevor Miller. Then in Game 4, Corey Kluber pitched another great game. They got plenty of offense from guys like Carlos Santana and Jason Kipnis. The Indians won that game 7-2, jumping up 3-1 in the series. Obviously, at that point, Cubs fans have been through a ton of misery in their lives. So, you were hearing a lot of negative talk around the city, especially on talk radio, about what was going to happen the rest of the series. Jon Lester answered with a really strong performance in Game 5 to make it a 3-2 series. Then the Cubs went out and mashed Josh Tomlin last night in Game 6 to even the series up at 3-all. And that's where we were going into tonight's Game 7. Tonight's game, I had a feeling early on that if the Cubs scored some runs early, they would be in really good shape. They seemed to really feed off of that in previous games, especially in Game 6 when they jumped out and scored 7 runs in the first 3 innings. Tonight was no different. Dexter Fowler hitting the solo shot to lead off the ball game, putting them up 1-0 in the first inning. Then the Indians coming back and tying the game up on a Carlos Santana RBI single. Then the Cubs going back up 3-1 in the third inning. Javi Baez tacking on a solo shot to make it 4-1 and score another run to go up 5-1 before Kyle Hendricks was pulled, which was considered a questionable decision by Joe Madden, but it ended up working out. Obviously, the end result worked out okay. But one of many questionable pitching bullpen decisions by both managers tonight. So Madden got that going, got the ball rolling in that regard by going to Jon Lester with guys on base in the 5th inning. Lester ends up throwing a wild pitch once they're second and third and 2 out to Francisco Lindor. The ball took a funny hop away from David Ross, and then as Grandpa Rossi, as you Cubs fans call him, got out of his stance, looked like his spikes slipped on the dirt there, and ball got away. And Jason Kipnis, being the heads-up base runner that he is, came all the way around from second to score. So 2 runs scored in the play, making it 5-3. Then Ross answered with a solo shot of his own. Just unbelievable hitting all night by both sides. Probably the most home runs I've ever seen in a deciding World Series game. So that was pretty unique in that regard. So Ross's home run put the Cubs up 6-3 in the 6th. Then from there, things looked really good for the Cubs. Lester started to cruise. Then he handed the ball over to Aroldis Chapman. Chapman got the first 2 outs of the inning in the 8th. So the Cubs were 4 outs away from winning the world title in regulation. And then Chapman gives up a single to Jose Ramirez. And that was followed by a double by Brandon Guyer, who had come off the bench for Lonnie Chisenhall late in the game. So it's a 6-4 game with Guyer at second base and 2 outs. And that brought up Rajai Davis, who was merely in the lineup just because they had benched Tyler Naquin from because of his defensive mistakes in Game 6. They weren't really counting on too much offense from that center field spot tonight in Game 7. But Davis had a really good at-bat. One thing I noticed is that he did something that they don't really talk about with young players today that I've seen, in that he choked up on the bat and really shortened up his stroke against a guy like Chapman, who can hit triple digits with that fastball, especially inside. So in order to keep up with the inside fastball, in order to catch up to it, you had a shorter swing from Davis, and he choked up on the bat, was able to make pretty good contact on an inside pitch, and he hit a 2-run homer over the left field fence, to which I told a number of people, my girlfriend included, that that home run was something that you won't see in baseball maybe in a very, very long time. You'd have to go back to 1960 in that great Pirates-Yankees Game 7 to find a home run hit that late in the ball game to either tie it or put a team ahead. So I'm not going to say it's going to be another 50 years per se. I'm not going to go on the record as saying that, but it's going to be a long time, I feel like, before we see something that crazy again in a Game 7. And then, so that tied the game up at 6. Then Madden left Chapman in the game and gave up a hit to Coco Crisp. He left him in there to finish the 8th. And then after the Indians were able to wiggle out of the 9th with Cody Allen and Brian Shaw pitching the 9th inning, they brought Chapman out there again in the bottom of the 9th, and he was able to retire the side in order in the bottom of the 9th. Probably the Indians' best chance to win the game was with their bats, because it seemed to me that their pitching staff was pretty tired. Once again, in the 10th, they went back to Shaw, who seemed like he didn't have anything left. And that was ultimately, in my opinion, the decision that cost the Indians the game and the World Series. Subsequently, the World Series, I should say, was leaving Shaw in the game in the 10th when he had already thrown 20-plus pitches and seemingly did not have anything left. Trevor Bauer came in to relieve him, but that was after he gave up the game-winning hit to Ben Zobrist, who collected the biggest hit of his career, of his baseball life, in the 10th, driving in the go-ahead run. And then once the bases were reloaded, Miguel Montero got a big hit to drive in another run to put the Cubs up 8-6. At that point, they removed Shaw from the game finally after he had given up a couple of runs. So this was a game where I thought it was a mix of really spectacular clutch hitting by both teams, especially the Cubs. Some questionable bullpen management by both managers. But I think that the combination of, really level-headed at-bats by two big-time veteran leaders on the Cubs, Montero and Zobrist, plus the fact that Francona probably left Shaw in the game too long, that probably led to what ended up being the winning runs for the Cubs. So in the bottom of the 10th, you have Carl Edwards Jr. coming in the game, which if anybody had said in spring training that Carl Edwards Jr. would be faced with closing out Game 7 of the World Series on the road, probably would have asked you what drugs or alcohol you were on and how that happened. So I was stunned to see Edwards in this situation, but he was able to get the first two guys in the inning to get the Cubs within one out of the World Series title. Then he walked Brandon Guyer on a 3-1 count. Fastball kind of disappeared on him at that point, or at least the command disappeared on him. And then with 2 outs and a runner on, Guyer took second on defensive indifference. And that's when Rajai Davis was up again. And I think he was down to the last strike again when he laced a line drive back up the middle to score Guyer and get the Indians back within one run. If anything, I know it was in a losing effort tonight, but the clutch hitting by Rajai Davis was just outstanding. And, that's something that you don't see guys rise to that level in a Game 7 too much. But it's funny because he wasn't the only guy that did it. The Cubs, as a matter of fact, had more guys that did it. It's just amazing to see how many multi-hit games both teams had in terms of players in the lineup getting multi-hits in this game. So certainly a great effort offensively by both teams. But at the end of the day, they had the pinch hitter in the game, Martinez, once Coco Crisp got taken out, and he hit a weak ground ball to Chris Bryant. Bryant threw it to Rizzo, kind of fitting that these were the two cornerstone pieces of the franchise, recording the last out of the World Series. So there you have it. The Cubs win the World Series. That's a really crazy statement to even fathom. I can't even believe that I'm saying that. I knew this team was really good all year, but I had a wait-and-see approach just merely because a lot of times when you live in the city of Chicago, there's a lot of media hype around all these different teams. The Cubs have been faced with it over the years, the Bears, the Bulls in particular. Now, the Hawks and the White Sox, they've had to earn it because the popularity of hockey went downhill for quite a period of time before Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane came to town. And then, of course, the Sox kind of, in terms of a popularity perspective, are the second team in the city, and everybody knows it. So usually it's just the main three, which are the Bears, Bulls, and Cubs, that face the most media hype and the most media scrutiny. But this time, the Cubs, they had the goods. They were really that great of a team. 103 wins in the regular season. They're going to pick up numerous individual awards in the offseason. And but, of course, the most important thing, the Commissioner's Trophy is coming back to the North Side for the first time in the history of the Commissioner's Trophy. Don't even know what the trophy was in 1908 or if they even gave out a trophy. But this is certainly the first time that the modern-day Commissioner's Trophy will be coming to Wrigley Field. So really just an incredible effort by the Northsiders in this 7-game series, battling back from a 3-1 deficit for the first time that any team had done that since the 85 Royals. This team had a little bit of everything on their side. Just great clutch hitting. I can't say that enough. I mean, to see great at-bat after great at-bat like that, especially in crunch time, was really a sight to see. I thought that was just outstanding. And the starting pitching was really solid for most of the postseason, but the relievers really were kind of the unsung heroes, in my opinion. for the Cubs, especially in the latter portion of this series. We'll be right back to recap the rest of the World Series on the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. And folks, welcome back to the World Series post-game episode of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. This is your host, Ben Jacks. And for those of you just tuning in, or for those of you who are working or living under a rock today on November 2nd, the craziest thing happened today. The Chicago Cubs won the World Series. Like I said, I thought that tonight's Game 7 was, for me, one of the three greatest games I've ever seen in a World Series deciding situation. I thought that this game will be forever remembered, other than the fact that this broke the Billy Goat curse of 108 years. From a pure baseball perspective, I think folks will remember this game as one of the greatest team clutch hitting performances in one World Series game that I can ever remember. Or if you're about my age, about 30 years old, this is as good as you'll ever see in terms of team clutch hitting. And I also thought the game was a little bit marred by some shoddy, I'm not going to say shoddy relief pitching, but some shoddy management of the relievers. I thought some of the pitching change decisions made by both managers were pretty questionable, especially Terry Francona. Now, obviously, you're going to be harder on the guy that loses the ball game than wins it. I'm sure that if the Cubs had lost, I'd be ripping Madden right now. But he doesn't necessarily get a free pass either. I thought that both guys had their moments of questionable decision making, but certainly, in terms of clutch hitting, wow, both teams, right? So, to me, if we're going to do comparisons of games, and this is the great thing about Game 7s of the World Series, I've been telling a number of people this in the last 24 hours. I said, leading into this game tonight, there are going to be some things that you'll see in tonight's ball game that if you're kind of an amateur historian of baseball, this game, there'll be a moment that will remind you of a game that took place in the history of the World Series. In the history of Game 7s, this game will run parallel to a game from the past. For me, I wasn't sure how this game would turn out. I thought it'd be kind of a low-scoring pitcher's duel because Kyle Hendricks has been great for the Cubs all year. And, of course, Corey Kluber is my Cy Young pick in the American League. So I thought it'd be a low-scoring game. I thought we'd get something maybe similar to, I'm not going to quite say Clemens and Schilling in 2001, but something close to that. I thought it was going to be that good of a pitching matchup in terms of low-scoring. Both guys executing their pitches when they needed to win the game. But this game, in terms of just being an absolute slugfest for a Game 7, I think you'd have to go back to two games in particular from my father's generation, actually. And maybe even, when he was younger, he probably doesn't even remember these two games. But the two games I'm going to reference, you might want to maybe YouTube the highlights or just search in Google or Wikipedia. 1960, okay, the Yankees and the Pirates playing at the old Forbes Field. Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Whitey Ford didn't pitch that game, and they've interviewed him about that years later, and he's still using profanity as a 90-year-old man about it because he just still can't believe that Casey Stengel didn't start him in that game. And then on the Pirates side, they had the legendary Roberto Clemente in right field, Bill Mazeroski at second. That game actually made him, a famous Hall of Fame player. He went from being a good defensive second baseman to in Cooperstown because of that game. And just the great upset that was. I mean, obviously the Cubs came into this game the favorites to win the series, or even the favorites to win tonight's game, even with Kluber pitching. But the main reason why the game runs parallel to that 1960 game is just because of the offensive onslaught that took place in that 1960 game. The final score was 10-9. The lead switched hands a bunch of different times. There was no such thing as the shutdown inning for either pitcher in that game, either pitching staff, just like tonight. Whenever a team would score a couple runs, the other team would answer in the next inning. And it came down to the last inning, to the last batter. But instead of the road team finishing them off with the Yankees winning, it was Mazeroski hitting the only walk-off homer in the history of Game 7s in the World Series. So that was one of the games I initially thought of because of the multiple home runs hit, because of all the clutch hitting in the late innings of the ball game. Just both teams free swinging and hacking it up out there. Great offensive performance by both sides, and great at bats all around for both teams. The other game that I thought of in terms of just pure offensive output in a Game 7, another game with a lot of home runs, was 4 years later when those same Yankees played at Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, the precursor to Busch Stadium, against the Cardinals. Another game with a lot of home runs. And in that game, the home team had a Cy Young Award and eventually Hall of Fame pitcher throwing for them that day, and that was Bob Gibson. A relatively young Bob Gibson pitching for the Cardinals in Game 7. Like a lot of the pitchers in this game, he was on fumes. He threw... I know they probably didn't track pitch count. I guess you might have to look that up in Baseball Reference. But if I had to guess, he probably threw somewhere around maybe 130, 140 pitches in that game. Obviously, that's unheard of now in a Game 7 of the World Series, but back then you took the ball every fourth day, and there weren't these rounds of divisional play and then the LCS. It was just the World Series right after the regular season ended, like my father talks about in the Father's Day podcast from June. From 1968 and before that, the World Series took place right after the regular season ended. So at that time, in terms of the calendar, the pitching season for guys was shorter. So even though they threw more innings, they were participating maybe in less ball games. So Gibson, he threw 130, 140 pitches, and he was absolutely exhausted at the end of the game. But just like either Kluber or Hendricks or Chapman tonight, or any of the guys that pitched, I think everybody was running on fumes. But it was kind of the same thing where you had both pitching staffs completely gassed. Just like tonight, I felt like both pitching staffs were gassed. And you had two teams with a lot of offensive firepower slugging it out for 9 innings. Both games are two of the classic games of that great generation of baseball in the 50s and 60s. Two really landmark games in the history of the World Series. And now we might just have another one with this incredible Game 7 tonight. This is certainly as good of free advertising as you'll get for the game of baseball. I think from what I could see on social media, a number of people who I know really don't care for baseball, that really find it to be kind of a tedious, boring sport with not a whole lot of action, found tonight's game to be as nerve-wracking and nail-biting, edge of your seat as any game would ever get. So in that case, Major League Baseball achieved what they set out to do with having a great World Series matchup like this. And this truly was a great World Series matchup. You have two of the classic franchises, charter franchises of their leagues, playing for a World Series title that neither fan base or organization has seen in, I think they said 172 years, if I have the math correct, or somewhere around that. It's been a while. Needless to say, I think it was 176, if I do the quick math there. It had been a while since either team had won a world championship. So, but either way, this game, to me, if we're talking about games from the past, this reminds me of, this one is pretty unique because you usually don't get a slugfest in a Game 7, and that's exactly what we got, and you got to go back 50-plus years to find that. So, kind of back to what I was saying earlier, I think that the main takeaway that I got from this game was the great clutch hitting by both teams, but really some questionable managerial moves with the bullpens. For one, I thought that the Cubs probably could have left Kyle Hendricks in there to finish the fifth inning. I didn't think that. I know before the game, Joe Madden said that he wanted to give Jon Lester a clean inning. In other words, start him with the first batter, nobody on base, no outs. Let him work through it because he's a starting pitcher and he's not used to coming into the game in the middle of an inning. And that's exactly where he found himself in the fifth. He came into the game in the middle of the inning with a guy on base and got himself in some trouble and ended up giving up 2 runs. And I think that Madden could have done himself and the Cubs a favor had he just either started him at the beginning of the fifth inning or waited and had Hendricks work through the fifth and come out in the sixth. I guess the argument against that would be, well, you never know where Hendricks is going to go with that fifth inning. He might have caved in completely, but I think the way that Hendricks has thrown the ball all postseason and all year, at this point, I would imagine that he would have had to earn your trust. The only other move that I really questioned with Madden was leaving Aroldis Chapman out there in the ninth inning. I thought he was pretty tired at that point, but he gritted it through. You can say what you want to about him off the field, and I've said plenty on that subject, but in between the white lines on the bump, he's as tough as anybody in the ninth inning. So he showed a lot of grit out there to be able to throw 30-plus pitches in a Game 7 on the road after giving up the lead. He could have totally caved in and lost the World Series for his team. Instead, he was able to bounce back and get the shutdown inning that his team desperately needed at that point. And then on the Indian side, obviously the worst thing that happened tonight for them was really only counting on basically 3 guys out of the bullpen, which had worked so well for them in their first 10 wins this postseason. Unfortunately, you need 11 to win it all. And it didn't happen tonight because Corey Kluber got tired early, and then they really, once you got into the bullpen with Trevor Miller, Andrew Miller, had been lights out up until that point, as well as Brian Shaw and Cody Allen. Those 3 guys had been so good up until tonight's ball game, but you could see none of those 3 had anything left. Allen still had a little bit left. He pitched okay through the 7th and 8th, but then he came apart a little bit in the 9th inning when he issued a leadoff walk and let Jason Hayward get to third base, and then Brian Shaw had to come in to finish off the inning. But then once Shaw took the hill for the 11th after that 17-minute rain delay, oh yes, we had a rain delay tonight in the 10th inning of a Game 7 of the World Series. Once Shaw came back out for the 10th, you knew he had nothing left. I thought that Tito should have taken Shaw out of the game there. He didn't do it, and consequently, the thing that had taken the Indians to the final game of ultimately ended up costing them a world championship. Only relying on 3 guys was good enough to ride them through the first 10 wins, and then basically Francona wrote those three guys into the ground, and that was all she wrote. And with that, we will take another break, and we'll be right back with the conclusion of this World Series episode of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. And welcome back with the concluding segment of tonight's episode of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast, a recap of the 2016 World Series. Just to finish things up here, I just wanted to conclude by just once again mentioning the Cubs fans and the Cubs organization and congratulating them for winning this World Series. I know that I've been extremely critical, especially of the media attention that these guys have gotten, and then the words back and forth between me and some of my friends that are Cubs fans, and just in general, how irritated I get about hearing about how great this team is. Now I can go ahead and shut up about that because they've won it all. Once you win it all, that you've talked the talk. Now you've proven that you can walk the walk. And with that being said, I will shut my big trap about that. So I owe everybody out there a word of apology. But at the same time, I'd like to congratulate all my friends who are Cubs fans. I know that this is obviously very similar to, it's the same exact thing. What I experienced in 2005 as a White Sox fan. A little bit more drama for you guys because, this incredible 7-game journey through the Fall Classic. We swept Houston in 4 games, and the series was pretty much just dominated from start to finish by the Sox. Different circumstances, but when you win it all, it's just it's an incredible feeling. Especially, adding in this 108-year gap in championships to win a World Series with this group of really young guys who should be with the team for a long time. That makes it special. And then I know that a lot of my friends out there are like 3rd and 4th generation Cub fans, which makes it even more special. It's obviously that adds to it, because we all get that from, if we're diehard fans, we usually get it from a relative, and it might be 3rd or 4th generation, like I said. So it's usually a grandparent or a great-grandparent that started it all for you. And, I know that a lot of you guys share those special memories, and, I hope that this is definitely, a pinnacle moment for you guys as fans. This is something, winning the first one will never happen again. Look at it that way. So, I just think, and really the great thing about the World Series is, all the trash talking that goes on about what core philosophy is correct for an organization, who's getting the most media attention, all that BS goes to the wayside, because when you get to the World Series, A, you're just happy to be there, and B, you really hope you win. I know it's a pretty straightforward, simple statement, but it's gets as simple as that once you get this far. So that's why I think that is what really makes baseball great. And that's what makes the World Series so exciting every year. I know I'm really biased when it comes to that because baseball is my favorite sport, but for me, it doesn't get any better than a World Series, especially when it goes to Game 7. There's no experience like that. And in some ways, I do kind of wish that the Sox had a little bit more drama. Like maybe my mom and I had talked about this in the Mother's Day podcast. Like if they had played the Yankees instead of the Angels in the ALCS, and then played the Cardinals in the World Series, and some 7-game series, an absolute classic that they had to win at home, that would have been great. But either way, when you get to a World Series, it's really a once in a lifetime experience, especially getting there that first time. So, like I said, I apologize, as Sammy Sosa would say after he corked his bat, for for all some of the nonsense trash talking that went on during the year. But once again, I'd like to congratulate my friends who are Cubs fans. And, we'll see you guys back in spring training next year as you guys try to do the hardest thing in pro sports, defend a world championship. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the 2016 season. We'll have one more episode of regarding the 2016 MLB season. I'm going to unveil my Gold Glove and Silver Slugger Award winners for both leagues. And then from there, the coverage will be hit or miss as we go through the winter. It'll all be dictated on when major transactions occur, especially for the Sox, and then just around Major League Baseball in general. So that'll start to get going. We'll start to see free agency and arbitration and trades and things of that nature. That'll all start happening around the winter meetings, which are right after Thanksgiving. And then from there, we'll kind of ride the wave through the off season as teams get round into shape for spring training in February. And before you know it, it'll be right here. I believe it'll be April 2nd, Sunday, April 2nd. And I'm sure the Cubs will open at home at Wrigley on Sunday night, April 2nd, to hang the banner and show off the trophy and get the rings. So for my executive producer, Kevin McGrath, this is your host, Ben Jacks, signing off, saying once again, congratulations to the Chicago Cubs, the world champions for the 2016 season. And we'll be back very soon to unveil those final postseason awards, the Gold Gloves and the Silver Sluggers. And we'll move on with the offseason from there. Thank you very much. Have a good night.